Hi, what I'm holding in my hands right now is the soul of bread. This is wheat. These are the wheat stalks which come from the farm, and then they're processed in a mill, and then you get the beautiful wheat flour. I want to share with you the story of wheat. The purpose of a wheat berry or the grain of wheat is to come on earth and procreate. Its purpose is to make more and more wheat plants. But when you take that wheat berry from a wheat stalk and you grind it in a mill to make some flour, you end the journey right there. You take away its heritage, and what you want to do if you want to be a better baker is understand and respect that heritage. You really want to be sure that you are respecting and providing the best possible care to this wheat berry. That's why I want to discuss with you why it's important to use a good wheat flour. Here I have a company called TWF, and they have these three flours. I wanted to share with you what each of these flours mean and why we are using this particular flour and not something you buy from a regular market. Now, this is the all-purpose flour, and it's really good. It's unbleached. This is the bread flour, and it's a little higher in protein. For this class, we won't be using bread flour. We'll be using just all-purpose flour because I want to teach you what you can do if you don't have bread flour. So we'll keep this aside. It's just higher in protein. That's it. And then this is flour X. This is whole wheat, whole grain. It has some bran. It has some germ. And I realize I haven't shared with you what bran and germ mean. So I'll take you through the journey of a wheat berry. So a wheat berry, when it procreates, it has a germ. Germ is the tiniest part. It's towards the bottom of a wheat berry, and it contains the future of wheat. So it contains a lot of essential oils. It's extremely nutrient dense, and that is what makes a new plant. Then what covers it is the endosperm. Now that endosperm is what we usually have in all-purpose flour. That is just the starch. It's the food for the baby, which will grow ultimately to become another wheat plant. And then that is protected by another layer called the bran. And now that bran has tiny knife-like, razor-like fiber on it. And that is very healthy for you, but it's also not very healthy for your bread. So what happens is that bran, which is rich in your fiber, cuts into the gluten strands, and I'll explain what gluten is later. So the thing I'm trying to say is that most of the all-purpose flour that you get in the market is just the endosperm. They strip off all the bran, all the germ from it, but good companies like TWF keep some part of the bran and the germ in the flour, and that's very flavorful. So what's important here is not only knowing the parts of a wheat berry, but also how it's processed. Most of the brands bleach their flour, which gives it that beautiful, extremely white, artificial color. But TWF here does not bleach its flour, which is a good thing. We want unbleached flour. All the recipes in the class have been developed keeping unbleached flour in mind. If you are going to make something with bleached flour, just be sure that it won't be as creamy looking. It will be extremely white, and you'll also feel that it lacks some flavor. So we are using unbleached, unadulterated, really good quality, freshly ground flour. Another thing that is very important to keep in mind is that the wheat flour should be very fresh. The fresher, the best, because as it goes older and older, the essential oils from the bran become rancid, and you'll also feel that it's absorbing much more water. If you're living in a dry environment like I am right now, it will need much more water. So sometimes flour has around 14% moisture, but if you're living in a very dry environment, it will have around 8% moisture. So you need to add more water. So for absolutely best results, always have the freshest possible flour. Now I want to talk to you about gluten, which is something which is extremely important in bread baking. And you might have heard this term being thrown around by health practitioners or brands, and you might think gluten is that something wrong? Is there something wrong with my bread or with my diet if I have some gluten in it. And I'm here to tell you that's absolutely not true. So I want to share with you what gluten is. So what is gluten? Gluten is a network. Now, wheat flour is the only flour that we know of. It's the only grain that we know of which has enough amounts of these two proteins. Proteins called glutenin and gliadin. Now, glutenin and gliadin are the proteins, and when they come together, they create this network, sort of a mesh kind of network. Just imagine a chewing gum. When you chew into it, it becomes very elastic and very, very springy, and then you blow air into it, it traps the gas and becomes into a bubble. That's exactly what is happening in your bread. So glutenin and gliadin, they come together, and when you knead it, there are some factors which we'll discuss later. When you knead it, so you build a gluten structure, and the structure, when air goes into it or when water evaporates from it, it creates these holes and it becomes extensible. So yeast, it kind of farts out the carbon dioxide. I'm using that term. It kind of farts out the carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is trapped in this gluten structure. And when it's trapped, it becomes big. You might have seen the bread become bigger. And then if your gluten structure is strong enough, it stays where it is. It does not break away. It does not kind of burst open. So you might have seen some of the chewing gums, they burst open. And this won't happen if you have a good flour and if you have processed it very well into a bread dough, I mean. So that's all about gluten that there is. Another thing is how much protein content there is determines how strong your bread will be. So you might have seen some cake flour in the market, and cake flour does not have doesn't have much protein. So if you use that to make bread, it will become cakey, not bready. It will become very, very dense because there is nothing to trap air in. Then if you use some bread flour, then it will become very chewy. So there are some breads where you want texture like this, like pizza dough. You want it to be chewy, so you'll use that. But for our general purpose of baking, I'm using regular all-purpose flour. This is not cake flour, and this is what I'm using.